The streets of Los Angeles were alive with their usual chaos. Cars honked, people rushed by, and neon signs flickered against the darkening sky. Amid the noise and activity, a homeless woman named Clara sat on the corner of 5th and Main. Her thin frame was bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, and her weathered hands clutched a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps." Beside her was a tattered backpack containing everything she owned in the world. Unlike most of the other homeless people who were visibly not sober, she seemed present, making her sad expression even more noticeable. Clara had once been a nurse, a proud professional who loved helping others, but life had dealt her a cruel hand. The loss of her husband to cancer, mounting medical bills, and a series of unfortunate events had left her destitute. One thing led to another, and the debts accumulated over that time turned her American dream into a nightmare. Years on the streets had hardened her, stripping away not only her belongings but also her faith in people. She no longer believed in kindness or second chances. For her, she only had herself to rely on, and she knew that even taking help from others was rarely something that didn't have any strings attached. As she sat on the cold pavement that evening, her stomach growled with hunger. The few dollars she had collected all day wouldn't even buy her a warm meal. She knew that she could go to homeless shelters to get food, but it was dangerous. Being homeless is bad as it is, but being homeless in LA is even worse. She glanced at the bustling cafe across the street, its patrons laughing and chatting over steaming plates of food. A pang of envy and despair washed over her. "What did I do to deserve this?" she thought bitterly, while thinking back to the nice times she had just a couple of years back. Across the street, Johnny Depp was seated at a quiet corner table in the cafe, sipping a cup of coffee. Disguised in a simple hat and glasses, he was enjoying a rare moment of anonymity. He was so relaxed and unbothered that he was fitting right in. Johnny loved observing people, and from his seat by the window, he noticed Clara. Her downcast eyes and defeated posture tugged at something deep within him. He had seen pain before, on film sets and in real life, but there was something about Clara that felt different, a rawness that couldn't be ignored. Johnny waved over to the waitress. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice soft yet commanding. "Can I get a meal pack to go?" "Something hearty," the waitress smiled. "Of course, Mr. Depp." Johnny cringed slightly at being recognized but nodded politely. "Thank you. Make it quick, please." A few minutes later, with the warm meal in hand, Johnny left the cafe and crossed the street. Clara didn't notice him at first. She was too busy staring at her feet, lost in thought. "Excuse me," Johnny said, crouching down to her level. Startled, Clara looked up. Her tired eyes met his, and she instinctively clutched her backpack tighter. "I don't have anything," she said quickly. Johnny held up the takeout bag. "I'm not here to take anything. I brought you this." Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. You brought this for me?" Johnny nodded. "It's still warm. Thought you might like a good meal." Clara hesitated before reaching out to take the bag. The aroma of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes wafted up, making her mouth water. "Why?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Why would you do this for me?" Johnny shrugged. "Why not? Everyone deserves a little kindness now and then." Clara stared at him, searching his face for any signs of pity or condescension. But all she saw was genuine warmth. She opened the bag, her hands trembling, and took a bite of the chicken. Tears sprang to her eyes as the rich flavors flooded her senses. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't remember the last time I had a proper meal." Johnny smiled softly. "No need to thank me. Just enjoy it." Instead of walking away, Johnny sat down beside her on the curb. Clara glanced at him, puzzled. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Keeping you company," Johnny replied casually. "If that's okay with you." Clara frowned. "You don't have to do that. I'm just some homeless nobody." Johnny's expression turned serious. "You're not a nobody. You're a person just like anyone else. And everyone has a story. What's yours?" Clara hesitated. It had been years since anyone had cared enough to ask, but something about Johnny's demeanor made her want to open up. "I used to be a nurse," she began. "I loved my job. I loved helping people. But then my husband got sick. Cancer. We spent everything on treatments. hoping for a miracle that never came. After he passed, I couldn't keep up with the bills. I lost the house, the car, everything. Johnny listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. Clara continued, her voice growing steadier as she spoke. I tried to get back on my feet, but it felt like every door was slammed in my face. Eventually, I just gave up. Now I'm here. She gestured to the street around her, her tone bitter. I'm sorry you went through all that, Johnny said sincerely. But giving up doesn't seem like the person you really are. Clara scoffed. And how would you know who I really am? Johnny smiled faintly. Because I can see it. You've been through hell, but you're still here. That takes strength. Clara shook her head. Strength? I'm just surviving. That's not strength. It's more than you think, Johnny said, and surviving is the first step to rebuilding. They talked for over an hour, their conversation flowing easily, despite the stark differences in their lives. Johnny shared stories about his childhood, his struggles in Hollywood, and the times he had felt lost. People look at me and see the fame, the movies, the headline, he said, but they don't see the doubts, the failures, the times I felt like I didn't belong. We all have our battles, Clara. Yours just looks different from mine. For the first time in years, Clara felt truly seen. She realized she wasn't just a statistic or a forgotten soul. She was a person with a story worth telling. As the night deepened, Johnny stood and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. He handed it to Clara. Take this, he said. Clara opened the pouch to find several $100 bills inside. Her eyes widened. I can't take this, she said, shaking her head. Yes, you can, Johnny replied firmly. Use it to get a warm place to stay, some clothes, whatever you need. It's not charity, Clara. It's a chance. Tears streamed down Clara's face as she clutched the pouch. Why are you doing this? Johnny smiled. Because everyone deserves a second chance, and sometimes all it takes is for someone to believe in you. Over the following weeks, Clara used the money to rent a small room in a shelter and buy clean clothes. She started volunteering at a local community center, helping others who were in the same position she had been. Slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her life. One day, as she walked through the community center, she saw a familiar figure. Johnny was there, talking with the staff and handing out supplies. When he saw Clara, his face lit up. Clara, look at you, he said, beaming. You look amazing. Clara smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. I'm getting there. Thanks to you. Johnny shook his head. You did the hard part. I just gave you a little push. Years later, Clara became a counselor, dedicating her life to helping others overcome their struggles. She often thought back to the night Johnny sat with her on the curb, sharing his stories and giving her hope. It was a moment that changed everything. For Johnny, the memory of Clara was a reminder of the power of connection and compassion. In a world that often seemed cold and indifferent, he found solace in knowing that even the smallest act of kindness could ignite a spark of hope and transform a life. You don't have to be a celebrity or rich to do this for someone. Sometimes a few kind words and an honest talk can help out a lot more than just cold and wordless cash. When was the last time you talked to a stranger in need? How did that go for you? Let us know that story in the comments below.